Welcome to Reformed Thinking, where we seek to gain clarity and precision by taking complex ideas and extracting the essential components.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into just one Greek word, a single term that is so central to our understanding of morality, law, and, well, our standing before God.
That word is Adikia, or Adikia.
Right, and when most people see this word, their minds jump straight to the translation injustice.
Which isn't wrong, but it's not the whole picture.
It's not nearly the whole picture. That simple gloss is, I think, functionally insufficient. It just strips the term of its theological weight and its incredible scope.
So our mission today is to go way beyond that surface level.
Exactly. We're going to look at its linguistic family, the historical shifts, and the spiritual gravity of Adikia to really understand what the sources define as the very quality of wrong itself.
I really appreciate that focus.
Yeah.
Because a single word can carry an entire worldview, can't it?
It absolutely can.
We're looking at material that, it meticulously maps out the semantic landscape of this term. It contrasts it with its opposites and really dissects its internal structure. So let's start at the very beginning. What is the core definition of Adikia?
At its core, Adikia covers things like injustice, unrighteousness, wickedness, or wrongdoing.
A pretty broad range.
A very broad range. And what's immediately clear from the material is that this one noun is highly versatile. It's used to describe both these big abstract concepts, the overarching state of being wrong, and also specific individual acts that fall into that category.
So it's both the forest and the specific tree that's rotten.
That's a great way to put it, yes.
That versatility is critical then. It forces us to look beyond just the external act and to consider the internal condition. Now, every concept is best understood when you put it next to its opposite. The sources make a big deal about two main conceptual antagonists for Adikia. Let's start with the more obvious one, dikais.
Right, dikaioseno, justice or righteousness. And the relationship between these two is explicitly defined as adversarial.
So they're direct opposites.
They are the explicit opposite. This isn't just a partial contrast, it's a necessary mutual exclusion. If something possesses righteousness, it has to, by definition, exclude unrighteousness.
And this isn't just a theological idea that you only find in the biblical documents, is it? This opposition goes way back.
It does. It's a well-established principle from the classical world. To really get our heads around the term, we have to ground it historically.
So where do we see it?
Well, this pairing was in constant use. We see it in philosophy. It's specifically cited in Aristotle's categories. He would set up ethical concepts in opposition to each other to understand them better. You just can't define justice without also defining its absence, which is injustice.
That makes sense.
And then you have Jewish Hellenistic writers like Josephus, who use this same pairing when he was describing the nature of Jewish law and conduct, especially in Contra Apionem.
So whether you're coming at it from philosophy or law or ethics, the definition of Adikia is really locked in place. It's an act that violates standards of right conduct. It's the failure to meet the norm.
And ikaiasti is that norm.
Exactly.
And when we think of Adikia as that abstract quality of unrighteousness, that fundamental state, then righteousness is its required antonym. One can't exist where the other fully reigns.
Okay, that's the first great opposite. But this is where the sources push us towards something, I think, more surprising. An even deeper antagonist.
Yes. Adikia also stands in stark opposition to
ἀλήθεια.
Truth.
Truth. Now that's a connection that might not immediately jump out at you.
Yeah.
How does unrighteousness become the enemy of truth?
Yeah.
It sounds like you're saying wrongdoing isn't just a moral failure, but it's an epistemological one, a knowledge problem.
That is the crucial insight. The sources describe the quality of Adikia as being at enmity with truth.
At enmity, that's strong language.
It is. Because a key fundamentally involves a deviation from reality as it's been established by God. If righteousness is conforming to the standard of God's character and God is inherently truthful, then unrighteousness has to warp our perception of that reality. It forces us to build a kind of false world to justify what we're doing.
And that immediately brings to mind some very specific theological contexts.
It absolutely should. The most powerful scriptural phrase cited in the material, the one that captures this conflict perfectly, describes people who are holding the truth in unrighteousness.
The Greek for that is tudelion ketichon.
That's the way.
And that verb katichon, it feels like it means more than just passively ignoring the truth. It suggests something more active.
It's very active. It means holding it down, suppressing it, or restraining it.
So this isn't accidental ignorance.
Not at all. This suggests a hostile containment. The knowledge of the truth is there, but the unrighteous state of the person, the Adikia, acts like a clamp. It restrains the truth from operating freely and reforming that person's moral character. This directly links the inner moral quality of the heart to the external intellectual state about reality.
So if we were to apply this to our understanding of human corruption, it implies that the problem of sin is not just that we act badly,
No.
but that we willfully misrepresent reality to ourselves.
Yeah,
We are unjust because we are actively suppressing the truth that would lead us to righteousness.
that's absolutely right. The pursuit of self-justification that's inherent in Adikia requires distorting the light of Adikia. You simply can't commit yourself fully to an unjust act and at the same time maintain an unbiased, honest evaluation of that act's goodness or its consequences. The unrighteousness warps the very tools we use to perceive and handle truth.
Which is why for a reformed thinker, a moral problem is always also a knowledge problem.
Always. Because our unrighteousness affects our ability to see the world truly.
Okay, that sets the stage perfectly for the semantic breakdown. We've established that Adikia is this multifaceted, powerful concept at war with both justice and truth.
Right.
Now we need to differentiate the members of its linguistic family. Understanding the difference between the noun, the verb, and the concrete noun is, well, it's essential for precision.
It is.
Let's use that analogy from the sources. The difference between a disease, the state, the process of contracting it, the action, and the specific symptom, the completed act.
That's a fantastic framework for clarity. Let's start with Adikia again. The noun, the abstract quality, the disease itself.
The underlying condition.
Exactly. This refers primarily to the quality or state of being unjust, unrighteousness, or wickedness. When we use Adikia, we're focusing on the phenomenon of transgression generally. We're defining the underlying nature of the problem itself.
So it describes the internal condition, the moral state of being broken or, corrupt.
Precisely. And this is why it has such a broader scope. It's not just about listing isolated incidents. The material points out that it can define the atmosphere itself.
Like the essence of the evil world.
Yes, which we see famously translated in James 3.6 as kosmos tosikaios, the world of unrighteousness.
And that passage isn't just saying the world contains some unrighteous acts.
No, it's defining the very nature of the system as corrupted by unrighteousness.
Okay, let's slow down on this next technical linguistic point because I think it beautifully illustrates its function as a defining quality. The sources talk about its use in the genitive case, replacing an adjective, a Hebraistic construction. What does that actually mean for us?
It means it acts as a very specific kind of descriptor. In Greek, you would often use an adjective to describe a noun like an unjust reward. But the genitive of quality uses the abstract noun ikai itself to define the nature of the thing.
So it goes deeper than a simple description.
Much deeper. The sources cite the example misaisikais, which translates literally as reward of unrighteousness.
So instead of just saying it's an iniquitous reward, the grammar is suggesting the very substance, the nature of the reward, is unrighteousness.
That's the feeling it conveys. It's a grammatical shortcut that elevates the concept. Unrighteousness isn't just an attribute of the reward. Unrighteousness defines the reward. This strongly confirms that Adikia functions as a description of inherent moral character. It defines the quality of whatever possesses it.
And stepping back to the theological alignment, how does this abstract state connect to the bigger picture of sin?
Well, the material defines Adikia sin specifically because it disrupts relationships.
Both kinds of relationships.
Both. Between communities and, most significantly, between humanity and God. It's not just a flaw. It's a failure to adhere to divine moral principles, commands, or laws. The state of Adikia means the individual is fundamentally out of step with the divine order and God's standard of righteousness.
Excellent. So we have the state, the disease, Adikia. Now let's move to the verb, the process of contracting that disease. Adikia.
This is the voluntary action, the doing of the wrong.
The active part.
Yes. Adikia means to do wrong or to act unjustly. Classical thinkers like Aristotle gave us a really clear legal context for this term. He defined it as to harm voluntarily contrary to the law.
And that word voluntarily seems key.
It's the key word. This is action taken with intent against a known standard. It's the active movement from the state of unrighteousness into a deed of unrighteousness.
And the sources detail the different ways this verb is used, suggesting it covered a whole range of interpersonal dynamics.
It did. We see three main ways it operates. First, it can be used absolutely, just meaning to be in the wrong. You are in a state of fault.
Simple enough.
Second, it's transitive, meaning to do wrong to someone or to do him an injury. This covers that direct interpersonal conflict.
I also noticed the interesting detail that it's used with the accusative of object, which suggests it could be about damaging property, not just people.
That's vital for grounding the concept. It means damaging something. It could be land, a piece of equipment, even an animal like a horse. This shows that Ādikия wasn't just reserved for high moral crimes. It was part of the mundane vocabulary covering everyday harm and property damage.
And then there's the passive use, ikestai.
The passive form, edikestai, means suffering wrong or injury or damage, or simply being wronged.
So being on the receiving end.
Exactly. And in the Septuagint, this usage is heavily weighted towards social justice issues. It frequently translates Hebrew terms for to oppress or to defraud. It speaks powerfully to the plight of those who are experiencing the active harm inflicted by others.
Now this leads us to that significant semantic shift we mentioned earlier. The comparison between the verb's use in the Septuagint versus the New Testament.
Right.
In the LXX, Ādikия was used without condition for sinning against God, giving it this heavy religious focus. But the material asserts that in the NT, the verb was largely relegated to mundane speech.
It was.
While enmity, to sin, took over the primary role for religious transgression. That feels like a massive demotion of a theological concept.
It's a striking specialization, isn't it? In the New Testament, EQ often appears in the context of everyday affairs, disputes between neighbors, economic unfairness, or just generally hurting someone. This created a kind of linguistic division of labor.
So, a marbatin for the religious meaning, sin against God.
And EQ settled into the role of civil offense, wrong against man.
Wait, hold on. If the common language moved the term for doing wrong away from a sin against God context and into a merely civil one, doesn't that inherently risk demoting social justice in the minds of later generations?
That's a very sharp question.
I mean, if wronging your neighbor only falls under ikio, the mundane category, and sin against God falls under imokratin, the religious one, doesn't that create the very cleavage that the earlier biblical perspective tried so hard to avoid?
And the sources don't let us rest on that easy division. While the frequency and the primary domain of ikio shifted in the New Testament, the inherent theological link, which we'll get to more in the LXX section, it remained intact through the concept of ikia itself.
So the state of unrighteousness is still the root.
Still the root. The shift is linguistic, but it's not entirely theological. For Paul, for example, a civil wrong still violates the law, which is defined by God. The specialization of ikio just meant the NT writers had a specific, distinct word for human-to-human offense, which made their prose clearer, but they never disconnected that offense from the overarching state of ikia that defines the non-righteous person.
So the semantic pressure cooker led to a more efficient vocabulary, but the underlying unity of ikia remains. That's helpful. Okay, let's move from the disease and the process, ikio, to the specific symptom, the concrete completed act. Ikime, adikama.
This is the third part of the taxonomy, and it is the most specific. Ikime is the concrete term, referring specifically and only to the completed act of wrong.
The completed act.
Only after it has been performed. Before that, it's just the plan for an unjust act. It's not yet an ikime.
I see. It has a temporal specificity to it.
Precisely, and this is the critical functional distinction. Unlike the abstract noun ikime, ikime cannot denote wrong in the abstract. If you're talking about the general wickedness of the world, you use Adikia. If you're listing the specific crimes committed yesterday, you use ikime.
The sources also make a strong point about the nature of this act, distinguishing it from just general failings.
Yes, and this speaks to the essential element of deliberation. Ikime implies a deliberate act of wrongdoing. This separates it rigorously from other types of faults. For instance, an accidental fault is an ekima, something that happens purely by chance. A general failure or missing the mark, which can be accidental or intentional, is often captured by amima.
Okay, so if I step on your foot by mistake in the dark, that might be an eczema, or maybe a minor abitima if I was being careless.
Right.
But if I intentionally commit fraud against a contract, that is a clear ekima.
That's the perfect way to delineate them. The fraud is deliberate, unlawful, and completed. The sources confirm this focus by noting its heavy presence in legal and juridical contexts, like violations of Jewish or Roman law. We see this specifically in the Book of Acts, for example, where it's used in court settings. It refers to concrete charges that can be proven.
And when we see the plural, ekimata, it emphasizes the sheer quantity of visible transgressions.
Exactly. When the sources discuss its use in Revelation 18.5, the plural emphasizes the blatant concreteness of countless open and unlawful misdeeds. It's a list of tangible crimes piled high to heaven.
So to review the taxonomy, Ἀδικία is the state, the quality, the disease of unrighteousness.
Ἀδικία is the process, the voluntary action of wronging someone.
And ἐκείμαι is the completed, specific, deliberate symptom, the concrete act that can be listed and judged. This level of linguistic precision really changes how we should read and interpret passages about sin.
It forces us to ask, is this text talking about the structural failure of the world?
Yeah.
The immediate process of a voluntary wrong, ἀδικία, or the final recorded crime? Knowing this taxonomy is key to moving beyond a surface reading.
That breakdown is exceptionally helpful. But to truly grasp the weight that ἀδικία carries in biblical theology, especially for listeners interested in Reformed doctrine, we have to look at this third section, the theological transition that was facilitated by the Septuagint, the LXX.
This is maybe the most significant part of our discussion. This is where the term stopped being just a classical term of law and became a word steeped in the concepts of sin against a holy God.
The sources use a great analogy here, saying the Greek container, ἀδικία, received entirely new contents from the Hebrew source. And those contents fundamentally changed its substance. So which Hebrew concept is the primary source of this new content?
The most frequent, and so the most significant match, is the Hebrew word gas, or oshin. Ādia is used to render oshin an impressive 67 to 69 times in the LXX.
So that's the bedrock of the equivalence.
Yes, the bedrock.
Let's spend some time on oshin itself, then. It's more than just a synonym for sin, isn't it?
Oh, far more. Oshin carries the specific nuance of misdeed, sin, or guilt caused by sin, and often it even includes the resulting punishment itself. The root idea of oshin is distortion or deviation, a twisting away from the straight path.
A twisting.
Yes. When a person commits oshin, they have turned aside, and that turning generates a debt, a stain of guilt, which requires a reckoning.
That concept of guilt caused by sin is so crucial. It links the action directly to the consequence and accountability before God. It moves the focus away from just social harm.
Absolutely. Owen emphasizes the weightiness of the sin. It generates a moral burden. And so when ἀδικία is used to translate Owen, it takes on this entire weight, the deviation, the resulting guilt, and the accountability.
Where do we see this pattern?
All over the prophets. When God addresses the own of Israel, translated as ἀδικία in places like Jeremiah or Ezekiel, the discussion is never about isolated poor choices. It's about systemic moral deviation that invokes divine judgment.
But the sources also make it clear that ἀδικία acts as a truly comprehensive term. It wasn't just used for owed, it became the single Greek word used to map failure against God's standard.
That's right. The LXX translators needed a concept broad enough to capture the whole landscape of transgression, and ἀδικία became that umbrella term. It ended up encompassing concepts that ranged from physical violence all the way to betrayal. It became the default word for moral unrighteousness, regardless of the specific flavor of the offense.
So can you elaborate on how it handles these different flavors of Hebrew wickedness?
Right.
Let's start with, say, violence and malice.
Certainly. Ιτέκα translates, or aimas, 14 times. Ιτέba is the word for brutal, wrongful violence and oppression.
Like in Genesis 6.
Exactly. Genesis 6.11 and 13, where the earth is filled with demas. By using eka there, the translators are saying that the violence gripping the world is an expression of fundamental unrighteousness. It's also used 14 times for apla Allah, which signifies badness, malice, generalized injustice, as in 2 Samuel 7.7. So it links the abstract quality of malice directly to ike.
So physical wrong and internal malicious intent are both covered? What about offenses related to truth and property?
The coverage is extensive. Ādikā renders eka, sheker, 7 times. Sheker refers to falsehood, lying, breach of faith. This just reinforces our earlier point that ākai is at enmity with aleia, with truth. Dishonesty is explicitly an act of unrighteousness.
And what about oppression? That's such a key theme in the prophets.
That falls under shek, translated 4 times. Shek means oppression, extortion, brutality, which we see in pleas like Psalm 72. And this is crucial. The systems and acts that harm the poor and marginalize are not considered secondary moral failures. They are core expressions of piak. It also covers heaven 6 times, which is a broad term for evil, sin, injustice, deception. Even the Aramaic word iniquity is covered once.
This detailed lexical mapping, it just shows that the Greek term was used to convey a single, unified theological concept of moral failure.
Yes.
Where specific actions, violence, deceit, oppression are all just symptoms of the larger seed of unrighteousness.
That is the takeaway. The linguistic blending is a theological statement.
Well,
all moral deviation is one problem, whether it manifests socially or personally.
So if the noun, cake, absorbed all this weight, then the verb etate, to do wrong, must also carry a proportionate weight in the LXX. It has to become a religious verb.
It did. We have to reiterate that in the LXX, the verb ikio was used unconditionally for sinning against God. It often translated pe'a, which is the most general and frequent Hebrew term for missing the mark, for sinning. This is the clearest evidence that the religious meaning completely overrode the classical, merely legal one.
The example of King David's confession is probably the most powerful illustration of this transformation.
Indeed. In the Hebrew text of 2 Samuel 24, David confesses, I have sinned. The LXX translators rendered this with the verb ikio, giving us, I have done wrong. Iki.
Think about the implications of that.
They're huge. David's action numbering the people was a transgression against a divine command, and the translators chose the term that was originally rooted in social law to describe this profound vertical sin against God.
So even though the act had vast social consequences, a plague was unleashed on the community. The ultimate offense was seen through the lens of disobedience to the divine lawgiver.
Precisely. The social effect flows directly from the religious offense. We also see ikyo used to translate concepts like disloyalty or trespass, specifically when referring to a sin against God, like King Uzziah's unlawful offering in the temple. This consistent application of the verb to acts of direct defiance shows that the Godward reference became an inherent part of ikyo in the biblical context.
And this unified view seems to have been reflected in the writings of Jewish thinkers of that era, who were bridging that gap between Hebrew and Greek thought.
They absolutely did. Josephus, writing his histories in Greek, employed ikio to denote the violation of the law and active disobedience to God. He explicitly said that a person could simultaneously wrong the laws and, through them, God.
That's a crucial intellectual step. It removes any potential separation between ethics and theology.
It does.
This brings us to the structural centerpiece of this whole deep dive. The core finding that in the biblical worldview captured by the LXX, there is no cleavage between the social and the religious meaning. Why is this unity so important for our understanding of sin?
Because it speaks directly to Reformed doctrine concerning the unity of God's law and the nature of sin as essentially Godward. If you accept this premise, then social wrongdoing, fraud, oppression, theft, just hurting a neighbor, inherently carries a violation against the divine command. You cannot isolate a horizontal offense from a vertical one.
So when a person commits an act of oppression, the problem isn't just that the victim suffers economic damage.
No.
The problem is that the oppressor has directly transgressed God's character as revealed in his commands.
That's the necessary consequence. The source material emphasizes that social wrongs were often rendered by the same Hebrew terms, like the, as sin against God, driven by the constant reference to the divine command. If the command comes from God, its violation is against God. The definition of righteousness, ikasji, is adherence to God's standard. Therefore, ikas is any deviation from that standard, making it an offense against the righteous lawgiver.
And pushing this idea back even further, the sources identify the ultimate source of all these misdeeds. They link them back to a rejection of the divine itself.
We circle right back to the root condition. The material draws on Philo's observation that ethiktes, godlessness or atheism, is the root, the P of all istite.
That's a profound insight.
It is. The structural failure of the world, the kistitsitikas, is sourced in the rejection of God.
So the specific crimes we see, the concrete etika, are just the surface manifestations of a deeper spiritual godlessness.
Exactly. And this is perfectly summarized by that catchment basin analogy we like so much. The basin of legal and social misdeeds, ET, isn't filled with pure, neutral water. It's filled with heavily mineralized water, sin and guilt against God. The structural defect isn't poor construction. The entire composition of the water, the very substance of wrong, is altered by the contamination of godlessness. The issue isn't surface-level poor etiquette or bad policy. It's a structural defect stemming from misses.
This deep dive has completely restructured the way I view this single word. Let's provide a final comprehensive summary for the listener, tying all these separate strands together.
Okay. Ikai is redefined for us. It's not just failing a neighbor, it's a fundamental, pervasive quality of unrighteousness, a structural state that places the individual at enmity with both divine justice, δικαιοσύνη, and objective truth.
And its theological roots, forged in the LXX translation, grounded entirely in disobedience to God's command. It is sin that disrupts the vertical relationship with God and that manifests in horizontal misdeeds like violence, fraud, and oppression. It encompasses the very essence of the evil world itself, flowing from the root of godlessness.
And we have to make sure we maintain the semantic distinction when we talk about sin and wrongdoing.
Let's quickly recap that vital distinction one last time for maximum retention. Ikai is the state or quality.
The pervasive wickedness, unrighteousness, the disease of the soul, the general phenomenon of transgression.
Iki is the process or performance.
The voluntary action of acting wickedly, of doing injury, the process of contracting the disease, and even though it's often relegated to mundane speech in the NT, it retains its Godward context through the wider Aki.
And finally, Iki is the specific, deliberate, completed act.
The concrete, unlawful misdeed, the measurable symptom that proves the presence of the disease. This tripartite structure provides the necessary precision to understand the scope and origin of sin as presented in the scriptures.
This realization that Age captures a comprehensive opposition to God's character and rule leads us to a final necessary thought.
We established that the sources define Ikai as the quality of unrighteousness impossible in God, citing Romans 9:14, is there Ikai with God? By no means. If the source of all wrongdoing is hestis, godlessness, and Ikai is the resulting state of the cosmos, then consider this. The mere presence of specific concrete ekemata in our lives confirms the necessary state of Ikai in the world. This structural global quality of unrighteousness is so pervasive and so deeply rooted in the rejection of truth and God's standard that it requires a full and complete divine intervention, not just improved social laws or minor behavior modification, to rectify the cosmos of unrighteousness. That fundamental state must be dealt with by a power outside the system itself.